What's up, everyone? Welcome into the Dear Miss Fantasy Show. It is me, your host, Tera Roberts. This is the official mailbag show for Player Profiler. It's Wednesday, October 30th, the day before Halloween, and we are live. So, welcome to everyone tuning in. Say hi in the chat. I already see some comments in the chat. We are going to today we're going to talk about a topic. Obviously, we're going to answer some questions because we answer lots of questions live. So, I mean, that's the entire purpose here, but we got stuff to talk about too. And we're going to talk about a topic on this podcast that I have never talked about on a podcast exclusively. It is tight ends. Tight ends. They have never been a featured subject for me because, well, I mean, it's an extremely small pool of options to talk about and actually usable assets, but this is a special time here. We shouldn't get carried away with last week's massive production, right? Obviously, the touchdowns were out of control. Maybe pushed by big tight end industry. I'm halfway kidding on that because it seemed like the NFL had some incentive to get some stuff to tight ends, but I don't know if I'm a massive conspiracy theorist there that they were all trying to get the tight ends the touchdowns. But we're going to still talk about it. There's some very real production from last week that is going to stick. Some of it won't, so we'll talk about that too. And before we dive into that, we'll go ahead and jump in and take some questions because the chat is already live here. And I welcome you all in. We got Myers and Chubb. And again, I apologize. I'm going to cough. We're a little late getting started today. It's going to be a wee bit of an abbreviated show. My cough is worse than it typically is usually. And it's been a wee bit of a chaotic day here. So we're probably going to run about 30 minutes or here. So go ahead and drop those questions in so we can get them in early. From Anthony, Math, Myers, or Chubb? That's a really good question. I love Jacobi Myers this weekend. I actually did did I do a video on Jacobi Myers this week? Technically, I think I did. And I'm gonna write about him and we're gonna talk about him this week on a podcast tomorrow. I lean towards Jacobi Myers. Now, Nick Chubb, I do like. Obviously, he is the lead back there. Volume will continue to increase for him. But there is a wee bit of an issue in terms of his usage in that offense with lack of receiving upside, even with Jameis, getting the offense going. There are still some limitations there, obviously. So we do kind of worry about the ramp up for him kind of being better season long than it is specifically this week. So Myers is a guy that I like a lot in this matchup. Somebody who I love a lot in this matchup, for one. And then two, he's been sneaky reliable since I won't say the exit of Davante Adams because technically Davante wasn't playing before then. So since Davante Adams exited the lineup for the Raiders, even though he was on the team, since he exited the lineup, Myers has been wide receiver 30 in average points per game, averaging about 10 fantasy points. It might not seem like a lot, but like just generally for perspective, that's the same range of average as someone like Zay Flowers and DJ Moore and Marvin Harrison Jr. So Myers has been solid. He's very playable. Someone that I like this week in a really good matchup. What's up, Chef? What's up, Albert? Welcome in. Welcome, guys. What's up, Steven? Saying hi to everyone in all of the chats. What's up, bruh? Brady says, start Keenan Allen or Elijah Moore. This is a good question. If you know me, I am a Keenan Allen truther. But if you also know me and have been following me this year, I've rarely said Keenan Allen's name, unfortunately. I feel like we kind of saw this one coming. Even though his draft value decreased significantly, I only have one share of Keenan Allen literally anywhere. I think that's inclusive of even bestball. Like that just feels bad, right? As somebody who has been a long time supporter of him, but just him transitioning into that crowded offense. And on top of that, transitioning to a new team. Also, we have not even gotten into potential weather games for Keenan Allen. This is a California boy, all right? It's been a long time since he has consistently played in cold weather. So I was a little bit concerned for Keenan Allen coming into the season. This is still somebody who every now and then he will have a good game. So he's playable, especially in deep leagues. But we have to be wary of him. Elijah Moore is somebody who I think has staying power within this Cleveland offense. As long as we have Jameis Winston at quarterback. If DTR were to come in, good Lord, that would be another story. But we don't have that right now. We got Jameis, and we are trusting all of our Cleveland wide receivers now. So I do like Elijah Moore better than I like Keenan Allen this week. From Diego, is it time to drop Jordan Mason? No. Hold. I know it's frustrating because you're having to hold him through the bye week and the prospect of CMC being activated the week after that, which sucks if you really need a roster spot. But the reality is that technically speaking, CMC could come back in week 10. Let's say he comes back in week 10 and he's ready to go and he's amped up and he's got all the volume. And then all of a sudden he suffers a setback mid-game and it's Jordan Mason rest of season. No, we need to hold. We need to hold at least 2 weeks into Christian McCaffrey's return before we can cut bait. And I know that sucks because it literally pushes up us like right up to the fantasy playoffs. But unless you are in desperation mode and you've only got like 2 wins and you gotta make some win now moves and you can't afford to roster him this week, then you can drop him. But if you can afford to hold because you hate to drop him. And CMC gets injured literally in the same game back. So yeah, we got to hold on that one. From Chef, just traded Najee for a second in 2025 and Benson. I like that trade for you. I do. That's a good way to capitalize on the surge that we've got for Najee right now. And Benson, while he obviously hasn't popped yet, again, we expected this to be James Conner's backfield. So if you were drafting Benson, you knew that you were doing it for the long-term value there. So if someone is willing to sell him off, yeah, you 100%. That was a solid move right there for you. I like that trade. And a second ain't bad in this draft class either. We always say it's so funny, these draft class. It's so funny from a year to year basis. We're always like, oh, this draft class is fire. And then it's trash. And then it's the draft class. A draft class is a draft class, right? There's options. There could be unknown depth like this year. Would we have known that literally Bo Nix was going to be a potential marquee draft pick, even in Superflex in a second round? Yeah, no. At literally 2 years ago, as we're evaluating the draft class, we wouldn't have felt that way, but here we are. So take those picks. Yeah, love James Conner. Trade Jamar and Kyren for CMC, Nabers, and what was the rest of that? AJ. I don't know if it's is AJ Brown or are you abbreviating Aaron Jones? I mean, if it's I assume it's AJ Brown. I think that would have if that's AJ Brown, that would be fantastic. Even if it's Aaron Jones, like yeah, I like either side of that trade, regardless of which AJ it is. I like that for you. I see my brother in the chat dropping some emojis. Should I sell more? Which more? I'm trying to see if you dropped a comment before then. I don't think so. You got to specify which more it is. If it's DJ Moore, probably if you can get good value out of him, 100%. Just because again, as this, as Caleb Williams continues to develop, overall, this receiving core will be fine. But there's so much talent within it that it just kind of knocks that massive upside and ceiling off. So as long as you can get good value, I'm okay with that. Let's take one more question before we dive into one of our tight end topics here. What are we going to talk about? Trade Kupp and Pittman for CMC and Aaron Jones. I like that trade for you. It's risky. I mean, obviously with Christian McCaffrey, there is inherent risk there. But if he stays healthy and if Aaron Jones stays healthy, that is a massive win for you. So I'm willing to take the risk on that. I don't mind that trade at all, for sure. It's risky, but that's a league winning type of trade there. And when I play fantasy football, that's what I want to do. I mean, like risk, you take it. I have one of my favorite fantasy teams right now, a redraft team, is one where I took as my RB1 and 2, Kyren Williams and Devon Achane. Obviously, that team it's in a good position, right? And a lot of people would have initially looked at that team preseason and said, oh my God, like, why would you do that? Like, it's, extremely fragile, high risk. But that's when you're playing in leagues where you want that league winning upside and you can't afford to be safe. That's the kind of thing that you have to do in order to make that move to push you to the top. So yeah, I like risky moves. One more question before we jump into tight ends. Zay Flowers for Chris Olave. I don't particularly love that trade. And I get it, wanting to bail out on Zay Flowers because of the addition of Dionte Johnson, just because target share alone is not, it's been high with the exception of one game, I think week 7 for Zay Flowers. He's been had either 9 or 12 targets in each game over the past 4 weeks with that one exception. So target share has been fantastic. We expect that to come down for him with Dionte Johnson added to the team. So natural inclination is to bail out. But if I'm going to bail out on Zay Flowers, it's got to be for someone with a higher ceiling than Chris Olave. Because again, we've seen what that looks like. Lots of lack of touchdowns. And it's very, very frustrating rostering Chris Olave because in weeks where the volume isn't there, he doesn't have a safety valve and can be a very, very boom bust kind of player. And the boom is not high enough, unfortunately. Let's talk about tight ends here. Actually, before we do that, before we dive into the tight ends, I probably should take a commercial break here for the sponsors. I think I'm a little late on that. So we are going to take a quick commercial break and hear a word from our sponsors. And we'll be right back after this.
Oh, every week I'm answering these start-sit questions on Sunday morning. I go to the weekly rankings on playerprofiler.com just to make sure that my instincts are correct, and sometimes they're not. And guess what? More often than not, I go with the projections. You may not feel great about starting Daniel Jones or Wan'Dale Robinson, but the projections say, hey, that's the move. It may not feel right, but you use those projections to get it right. That's the power of the Player Profiler system. It's Evan Ringler, it's Bradley Stalder, it's Theo Greminger, of course, it's Billy Muzio making these rankings possible. The season rankings, so you know who to pick up, who to trade for. The Dynasty rankings are part of this. The offensive line rankings from Dan Fornick, one of the best in the business. Then we get our cornerback rankings, which show which corners are matched up with which wide receivers. And now, in collaboration with the IDP show, we have IDP rankings. Did you know that? Did you? So go to playerprofiler.com, use promo code PODFATHER. Get you 25% off the player rankings package right now at playerprofiler.com. Enjoy! Oh, every week.
All right, we are back. And we are going to, let's talk tight ends. Let's talk tight ends here. That is the subject of the day. The first tight end that I want to talk about here, obviously, it's got to be Cade Otton, right? What a week for Cade Otton. And I wanted to talk about Cade Otton specifically and these surging tight ends because we had a lot pop up with insane volume last week and insane touchdowns. And you're kind of trying to figure out, like, what's going to stick. What was an outlier game here? If there's any production that is going to stick, there's 2 people in particular that I am kind of crazy about long-term rest of season. Cade Otton is absolutely one of them. Do not look at Cade Otton's production in prior seasons and say that this is not a guy that can be that guy. Tight ends, especially when they're young, it takes time to develop them. Not everybody can come out and immediately have a Sam Laporta year, right? And even Sam Laporta is still young and struggling with volume right now. Not everyone can ascend immediately at tight end. It takes time occasionally. And it just took Cade Otton some time. And now he's got the opportunity, right, with both Mike Evans and Chris Godwin out. And even when Evans returns, Godwin is out. Otton will be the second look in that offense. So when we're looking at him and his upside here, and he had already been on the rise even before the injuries. Prior to all of this, weeks 3 through 7, Cade Otton averaged 7 targets per game and was the tight end 9 in average points per game during that span. So he was already existing. Like, let's just put into perspective. He was already existing as a reliable tight end. It just wasn't flashy production. This was a guy who was a solid streaming option on a weekly basis. We were just kind of, we weren't comfortable with it because how comfortable can you be with a guy that is the third option in his offense and has strong receiving backs as well? But we saw the surge when Mike Evans left early with the injury. And then we had Chris Godwin out. And he had 8 receptions, 10 targets, 100 yards. Then this past week, with both of them out, again, led the way, 10 targets, 81 yards, 2 touchdowns, a career best for him. Remember, 3rd-year tight end. This is not unusual for somebody to step into their own as a tight end at this point in their career. We expect Otton to continue to have strong viability in this offense in rest of season. He is a guy that is absolutely a must start at tight end on a weekly basis. And quite frankly, if you picked him up and we're streaming him and you've got another tight end on your roster, you could be in a position where maybe you have the ability to flex a tight end on a weekly basis because he's going to give you that level of production to where he's essentially operating as a wide receiver out there because he is the first look. And when we're talking about this Tampa Bay offense, you have to believe in Baker Mayfield. Like, you have to, man. I feel like I am so happy for Baker Mayfield because I defended him 10 times over when he was in Cleveland because that whole situation was just not fair. It was just not fair for him. You can't flip somebody through offensive coordinators and coaches over and over and over again and expect them to be successful. So the talent was always there with Baker. It was just getting him in a comfortable situation here. He's at home in Tampa Bay, and his production is going to continue even without these weapons here. So we love him. Cade Otton is his first look for the next several weeks here. And when Mike Evans comes back, he'll be the second look. That's still somebody with top 5 upside. So Cade Otton, that production here, absolutely going to stick. Let's answer some more questions before we talk about the next tight end. This is perfect. Right on target. From Senior Football, start Otton versus the Chiefs or Kincaid versus the Dolphins. One thing that I feel like is being underestimated this season, Miami's defense is good. Miami's defense has been solid this year. A little bit better defending the run versus the pass, but still very, very solid overall. I am not afraid of Kincaid this week, but Otton has the clear higher upside. I feel very comfortable starting Otton over Kincaid this week. That's the direction that I would go. From Fletcher Cox, would you trade Fletcher Cox? I like that name. Very football-y of you. Would you trade Swift and Kelce for Cook and Otton? Oh man, that's a good question. I would not do that. I would stick it out with the Swift and Kelce side there. If I'm isolating for me, and this is how much I do think that Otton is strong rest of season, that although I do have Kelce ranked higher rest of season, I don't feel like Otton is that far off. So that's not the part of the trade that concerns me. It's the Swift for Cook part of the trade. Cook has his fantastic weeks. And then, unfortunately, I do feel like he's going to have his very mediocre weeks. I do think that Ray Davis is real competition in the backfield. Every now and then, tight end. Every now and then, Ty Johnson is going to catch a receiving touchdown. And then at the same time, you've also got Josh Allen that can run. The receiving core is just massively updated. So, or massively upgraded since the addition of Amari Cooper. Everyone is just playing at another level here. Yeah, and you've heard someone say the exact opposite, and I get that because there are a lot of people that feel very strongly about Cook. Swift, though, in that Chicago offense, Roschon, his value is at the goal line. I don't think that Roschon will ever challenge Swift in terms of evening out in terms of carries. So the majority of carries are always going to favor Swift. Whereas when I'm looking at Cook and Ray Davis, the majority of carries, I do feel like at some point they can push Ray Davis a little bit more there, especially if they start to feel like they need to save Cook for the playoffs. Chicago, Their record has been strong, but they don't have that option. Buffalo is dominating. They're going to win their division. Chicago is not in that position. So I do think that Swift is going to have the heavy favor in terms of touches versus Roschon. So that's kind of my reasoning there. If I'm looking at the guy who I trust to have the higher level of touches, it's Swift. They both have goal line issues, right? In terms of guys that could steal touches, but volume for me favors Swift. And that said, I do like Roschon, but they've made it pretty clear that they prefer Swift as the volume back, and that Roschon's goal line usage is really just his only option there. Yeah, I get why someone would have Cook way over Swift, but that's not a dramatic difference for me. And the Kelce over Otton thing, that's really interesting. That's really interesting there. I don't think there's a major difference in the rest of season. Let's answer some more questions. Traded Ferguson for Njoku. Is that good? Yes, absolutely. I love that for you. Njoku rest of season. When Njoku has a quarterback that is not Deshaun Watson, he has top 5 upside. What we saw last year out of him was tight end 1 production when Deshaun Watson was out. When he was with Joe Flacco, that upside was incredible. I trust Jameis in the same way to continue to push that volume towards David Njoku. So, and it feels weird to say that you all of a sudden like all these pass catchers in Cleveland, but that's what Jameis Winston does to an offense. So, I absolutely have Njoku higher than Ferguson rest of season. That's a good move, especially because I like Jalen Tolbert. I like Jalen Tolbert, and I feel like as the season progresses, we could continue to see Tolbert push. And while that's not a threat to CeeDee Lamb in any way, it is a threat to Jake Ferguson's production. So just keep that in mind. Oh, good question. Kmet or Hockenson? So supposedly Hockenson is not going to be on any restrictions in terms of his snap count. Which makes sense because they have held him out appropriately. I don't feel like this is a situation where they use essentially the entire time that they had to be able to activate him. So I feel confident that we're going to see good volume with Hockenson, good usage from him. I would play Hockenson over Kmet. Should I trade Waddle and Addison or should I trade Waddle and Addison or Addison and Tracy for Olave? I could do Addison and if you're fine at running back and you need to upgrade at wide receiver, I could trade Addison and Tracy for Olave. But you're fine at wide receiver. I don't know if I would make that trade for you, especially not the Waddle one. Waddle and Addison for Olave, I'm not a fan of it. And it's just because when I look at Olave, if you want to make those trades, I would just aim for someone different than Olave. I've got major problems with the lack of touchdown opportunities in that offense for him. The ceiling is capped. I've never felt like he can pay off at his ADP. So Olave is someone who, for me, is more of a low-end wide receiver 2 rest of season. I just don't trust him to have that full massive upside, even in full PPR. Otton or Kincaid? Oh, I did that. I answered that for somebody else. Otton or Kincaid? I would go Otton over Kincaid. One more question, and then I'm going to talk about tight ends again. Just got offered CMC for Kamara and JSN. Thoughts? I don't mind that for you. It's risky. It's risky. Now, granted, with Kamara, just keep in mind that Derek Carr is coming back, even if it's not this week. Derek Carr is coming back, and it's going to increase that upside for Kamara. He was having a fantastic season prior to Carr getting injured. So I don't feel like you have to bail out on Kamara because we do have Carr returning, but I think that's a fine trade if you want to take that risk and get the overall RB1 upside for CMC, especially with Brandon Ayuk out. For sure. I don't mind that at all. All right, I'm going to answer some more questions here in a second, but I do got to jump back to our tight end topic of tight ends, big production. from last week, who are we trusting? I want to talk about someone who didn't necessarily have big production. He got the touchdown, but it wasn't massive production as a whole. And that's Evan Engram. Evan Engram is a guy that if you are looking to make a trade for a tight end, that's a huge target for me. And you have to do it immediately because this is a good time because the production wasn't overwhelming to where someone is going to say, oh, like, we're buying super high on Evan Engram right now. No, it was okay. He didn't pop in the same way as everybody else. But with Evan Engram, we have to look at what he did last year when Christian Kirk was out. When Kirk was out last year, rest of season from that game that he got injured, and it was very early. So including that game where he got injured through week 18, Evan Engram was the overall tight end one, averaging over 15 fantasy points per game. So for perspective for you, that level of production makes him a top 10 wide receiver and a top 12 running back. This is a guy who could have league-winning upside rest of season with Christian Kirk out and absolutely carry you rest of season. It's a set it and forget it and be at a massive advantage. So if there's a guy, a tight end that we're looking at having increased production through the remainder of the season, even with the fact that we kind of get the feeling that the Jags are kind of selling off little assets here and there. They just traded somebody and realistically they know they're not going to be able to compete. So we'll continue to see movement, but Engram is likely not one of those guys. He'll continue to be one of the favorite targets for Trevor Lawrence here. Again, a Jags team that has a terrible defense will continue to have to push volume. So Engram is absolutely somebody who I think production is going to continue to increase as the season goes on and has realistic overall tight end one upside that you would have a huge, huge advantage with. That would be essentially the production that George Kittle is putting out right now. Evan Engram or Cade Otton rest of season. I actually would have Evan Engram rest of season, and it feels a little bit riskier going with Evan Engram rest of season. But the reality here is that Mike Evans is coming back in a few weeks, so that's when he would become the second look in the offense. And while his production would still be fantastic, top 5 upside there, it would drop just a little bit. So personally for me, Engram is the guy that I would have higher rest of season just because Kirk is going to be out for the remainder of the season. Would you drop Otton for Engram? Already have Pitts. I would try and trade, honestly, because Pitts is the guy who is actually probably the shakier. And we can always talk about Pitts as well, because Pitts is one of those guys that had massive production. I would try and sell one of them, whichever one you can get the most value out, or whichever one you can get somebody to bite on. Someone more than likely is going to be more of a believer in Engram versus Otton, but you're not rostering him right now. So I kind of lean towards, for you personally, try to sell Kyle Pitts right now. I would want to roster both Engram and Otton. I don't want to leave Engram on waivers and try to sell Kyle Pitts coming off of that massive week. Because when we're looking at Kyle Pitts, that level of production that he had last week, that's an outlier game, right? We know that he's a big play threat. The touchdowns can be there for him. But we also know at the same time here, this is an offense with Drake London, Darnell Mooney, Bijan Robinson. There's way too many mouths to feed in this offense for Kyle Pitts to have that level of production on a weekly basis here. So I trust him more as a guy that we can see being, we're starting him for sure every week, right? But he's more so in that tight end 8 to 12 range rest of season. So we trust him. There are going to be days where he doesn't get the touchdown, and because there's not a ton of volume there, it is going to be underwhelming compared to Engram and Otton, who are going to have very favorable high volume output for the rest of the season. So honestly, if I were you, I would try to sell Kyle Pitts, free up that roster spot maybe. Sell Kyle Pitts, someone else, get a better position, and then add Engram. That would be my preference there. From Timmy Turner, Kenneth Walker and Dionte Johnson for Breece Hall. That's very even. Kenneth Walker has actually been in average points per game. And it's easy to kind of overlook because it's kind of been weird production. But Kenneth Walker in average points per game has been RB7 in half PPR. He's been very successful this year. The receptions have been up. The goal line opportunities have been there. He's been dominating from that perspective. So when I kind of look at Kenneth Walker to Breece Hall, man, I mean, it's super even. It's super even right there. So giving up Dionte Johnson on top of that, I would not make that trade there. I trust Kenneth Walker rest of season there. Obviously, he has the same level of volatility as Breece Hall because their offenses aren't perfect there. But Seattle is going to have to continue to push high volume. Their defense is not up to par. They will continue to have some of the highest point totals in all of their games rest of season. Goal line opportunities are going to be there. So I do like Kenneth Walker. I would not make that trade. Let's get back to the tight end questions over here. Kelce or Engram? I still prefer Kelce over Engram. I'm not enamored with the DeAndre Hopkins addition. It's good, right? That was good for Kansas City to do. So I'm not criticizing it. But DeAndre Hopkins coming in there, it doesn't seem like that is going to significantly take away from Travis Kelce. I think Kelce is still going to be the first look in that offense. So I lean towards Travis Kelce over Evan Engram rest of season. Guys I would have over Evan Engram would be obviously a Travis Kelce, a George Kittle for sure. A Brock Bowers is another one just based off of kind of similar usage there. Quarterback situation and team situation is a little bit shakier, but Brock has been a little bit more reliable. So I could go either way on that one, but I tend to lean Brock Bowers towards Brock Bowers a little bit more. Let's get back to some more questions here. No, we got another tight end question. We're going to stay on that train from Billy Bob. Who should I start? Jonnu or Kincaid? Jonnu has been very, very sneaky this season. I feel like he's going overlooked a little bit in terms of his potential. But it is very kind of boom bust. And we're looking at the matchup this week. It's not ideal. That said, on the reverse end, Miami's defense has been solid as well. So neither one of these guys has a fantastic matchup. I lean towards Kincaid, though, on this one. Pick 2, Metcalf, Cooper, Dell, or Mooney. So Dell for sure. And the whole Metcalf injury thing, because you have solid options, you might just want to forego that one. A healthy DK Metcalf is probably the guy that I would play, but you can avoid that risk because you have solid options. And I would go with Dell for sure, with Diggs out and Nico out as well. And then between Cooper and Mooney, I do lean a little bit towards Cooper, just a tiny bit. Thoughts on TJ Hockenson's return? We talked about that one a little bit ago there. We got that confirmation. It has been specifically said that Hockenson is not going to be on a snap count, which makes sense again, because this was a guy who didn't just come off of IR. They waited multiple weeks to activate him until they absolutely had to. So they've given him the proper time to rest. They didn't rush him back. So looking at TJ Hockenson, I've got him ranked, I want to say like tight end 13. Let me double check here. Tight end 13. That's it. And I like the matchup here with Indianapolis. So, and honestly, I could theoretically maybe push him above Dalton Kincaid and Jake Ferguson, just because Kincaid's matchup is not ideal. And Ferguson obviously has some situational issues there in Dallas, but the safer option there is kind of like a low end tight end one, kind of borderline right there. So Hockenson is someone who I do feel comfortable with starting this week, with that confirmation that he is going to play a full complement of snaps. The only concern we might have there is that what is the connection with Sam Darnold? These are not two guys that have been had significant time together, particularly in the offseason, because Hockenson would have been rehabbing. So you do get a little bit concerned on that, but I would still be comfortable with starting Hockenson this week. Thoughts on DJ Moore and Devontae Adams? DJ Moore has been underwhelming, and I think it continues. And that is just a function of the Chicago offense. And also a function of their defense as well. Their defense is so solid that they're unless they're playing in games where their defense that they're facing is absolute trash and they can put up those massive numbers. We've seen that from Caleb Williams. But as they kind of get into the tougher portion of the schedule that they're in right now, things are going to start to get a little bit unreliable in terms of being able to push aggressive volume there. DJ Moore is still the theoretical first look in that offense, but I don't feel super comfortable with him. I've got him ranked as a low-end wide receiver 2. Let me double check here. I have got him ranked as... Ooh, I don't see. Yeah, low-end wide receiver 2. Sorry, I just couldn't really see it there. Against Arizona, wide receiver 21. Arizona's defense has actually... been over exaggerated as an excellent matchup. It's a good matchup for running backs. In terms of the pass, it's not a layup matchup by any means. So this is not someone who I feel is a super comfortable must start, but he's a solid wide receiver too. If you don't have better options to go with, and certainly a flex option as well. Davante Adams, kind of same situation. I've got him ranked a tiny bit higher there just because volume is on his side. Consistent volume is a concern for DJ Moore. I trust Adams to get a certain level of targets. The issue there is that the touchdowns haven't been there, and I don't know if they're going to continue to be there. We expected an uptick last week against New England, right? Because that should have been, New England's defense is dealing with injuries. That should have been a layup matchup. It should have been a non-issue. Unfortunately, they still struggled against New England. So going against Houston, which again is that same type of defense where it should be a good matchup, they've been underwhelming. But at the same time, I truly don't trust Aaron Rodgers at this point. So their rest of season schedule is fairly good. Volume will be on his side, and that'll make Davante Adams a weekly wide receiver too. But I am a little bit lower on him than I think most analysts are. And that's just because of a lack of trust in that Jets offense as a whole. And the fact that volume has tended to favor Garrett Wilson a little bit. And he's been more productive with that volume there. So Garrett Wilson is someone who I prefer to Davante Adams rest of season. If you're going to be the second look in your offense, and I think that's going to continue for Adams, I don't particularly trust him moving forward. From Imagine Mike, thoughts on Zay Flowers rest of season. So I specifically wrote something up, and let me find it. Let me see if I can find it just so I can quote the exact statistics. I'm not going to be able to find it, am I? No. Oh man, I'm mad about that. I wanted to give you guys the exact write-up that I had for that, because I was looking at the target share that we had over the past 4 weeks for Zay Flowers. Just because looking at the first 4 weeks, I don't think is really fair. Looking at the overall is not really fair because the first 4 weeks, Baltimore's offense was trying to find itself. So looking at the last 4 weeks, I think the targets that he had were 12 in 1 week, 9 in 1 week, one where he only had one target. That's obviously an outlier game, and then 9 in the other week. He's been thriving off of volume in this offense here. And they found a way to make everything mesh very good for him with with the addition of Derrick Henry. I do have a problem with him moving forward because adding Dionte Johnson, the roles directly conflict. And touchdowns have kind of been favoring towards, now granted, he's, got touchdowns, but the guy that I think his role won't be effective is actually Bateman. Does that feel, am I jumping at Bateman? No. But when I'm looking at who he is in that offense, I think the production that he has is going to stick, and we're going to see a little bit of a downtick for Zay Flowers, unfortunately. So when I'm looking at Flowers, I feel like the high end right there of comfort level that I feel with him is low end wide receiver 2. Wide receiver 3 is probably more realistic, but I do have thoughts in terms of how to handle Zay Flowers because, and I think I was talking about this before a little bit, when we're looking at these wide receivers that have gotten traded mid-season, Davante Adams was the only one who got traded and stepped in and immediately had strong production because he knows the offense, he knows the offensive coordinator, and he knows Aaron Rodgers, right? But when we're looking at DeAndre Hopkins and Amari Cooper, they were traded and didn't immediately step into a significant workload, a significant snap count, because there's certain things that you have to get used to within that offense. They can use you, but they can't use you to the full complement and full level that you would be typically used in that offense. You need a week to acclimate, right? So when I'm looking at Zay Flowers specifically this week, I think Zay Flowers is going to be fine. If we see Dionte Johnson, and remember, he has been dealing with injuries. We don't know if these are Davante Adams type of injuries, but I think they're more real than the injuries that Davante Adams was dealing with. So I would not be shocked that if we see Dionte in the offense, it is on an extremely limited basis this week. So with that said, I think Zay Flowers is a fine start this week. And you should take this week. If he has a high upside game, take the opportunity to sell him. I would immediately sell off of a good performance this week. That's kind of my prediction of what's going to happen this week and the best way to handle it, because rest of season, it's going down. Unfortunately. Yeah, it's not looking good. I hate that for him. But Dionte has just traditionally been a target hog, right? He's a guy that's also operated off of volume. And last season, we saw Zay Flowers favor volume in the first half, and then finally the touchdowns came towards the end of the season. So maybe he could have that same trajectory this year, but I'm not feeling super confident about it. So that said, unless he has that sudden uptick in touchdowns, because they have not been here this season, the floor is going to become kind of scary for Zay Flowers. So yeah, this is a sell opportunity this week. Cross our fingers. This is a good matchup for him to it's because it's not a good matchup, but cross our fingers that he has good production and a good back and forth matchup here between two competitive teams. And if he has a good matchup, you sell. I want to take another question here on Jaylen Waddle rest of season, because I feel like that's kind of a similar situation where difference is that obviously no one has been added into the offense for him. But with the addition of the uptick in volume for receptions for Devon Achane, I think that has kind of hurt the value of Jaylen Waddle, who was someone who didn't always have that same level of consistency in terms of targets that we saw from Tyreek Hill. But if now we're looking at an offense where the one is Tyreek Hill and the two in terms of looks is going to be Devon Achane, then things start to get very uncomfortable for Waddle. So he'll have high upside games. Just kind of be realistic that he is in that wide receiver 2 range. And I don't think that he'll have that same level of upside that he had last year, unfortunately. So trading for him is fine, especially if you got him on a good deal, especially if it was something that you did before the Tua start, right? So Waddle, Tyreek, Achane, even Mostert a little bit were guys that I advise were all fine options to trade for when Tua was out, just because we know the upside that comes when Tua is in. And that's someone, and I'm not even high on Tua himself. Like I've got him fairly low ranked this week, and will continue rest of season just because it's a tough schedule for him, unfortunately, rest of season. And there's not going to be a lot of high upside fantasy opportunities, but we've seen that everyone around Tua thrives, even if his fantasy day is not fantastic. So Tua in this offense raises the value of Waddle. So even though he does appear to be the third look behind Achane, I'm still comfortable with rostering Waddle. Trade away Geno Smith and Jonathan Taylor for Kyren Williams. Yeah, I'm good with that. I do like Jonathan Taylor rest of season with the addition of Flacco in here. We have not talked. I didn't even talk about any news. My God, because we talked about that Dionte Johnson trade, but Joe Flacco starting there for the foreseeable future. They said this is not an experiment. So they are going to, this is not something that they're just doing for this week. They want to roll with Flacco. It's his job to lose. And we know Joe Flacco, he doesn't tend to lose jobs once he gets them. So, yeah, but that does open up opportunities in terms of goal line opportunities for Jonathan Taylor and volume for Jonathan Taylor. So I like him in this version of the offense with Joe Flacco. This is not a major concern for me. But Kyren Williams does have that true top 5 upside that Jonathan Taylor doesn't have because of the lack of receptions. So I'm okay with that trade for sure, especially because you're just kind of throwing in Geno Smith there. So yeah, I'm good with that. Let's talk about a couple more tight ends here, just because my theme is tight ends. So I got to talk about the tight ends, right? We'll do this real quick because we have a lot of questions to answer. But and we've talked about a few. We've talked about Kyle Pitts. We didn't talk about Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews is somebody who that's one that we have to monitor as well. If you want to sell him prior to what we see with Dionte Johnson, you might want to jump on that because that could also hurt Mark Andrews. And he has been coming up, and I've been feeling very comfortable with him. I don't have any shares, but starting him on a weekly basis was becoming comfortable. But now, unfortunately, things start to get a little bit more shaky for him. Sam Laporta, another guy who had a fantastic week last week, another start this week. Although Jameson will be back. We had Jameson Williams crazy. I wish Jameson would stay out of the news. Stay out of the news, Jameson, please. The whole gun issue. It doesn't sound like that's a big issue. Sounds like this was not something that is going to be a big court issue or anything like that. So not massive drama. So we should be okay on that end. But he's a good start. Laporta is a good start for this week. And then we get Jameson back, obviously. And then that kind of nixes his value. But David Njoku is another one. And we might have talked about Njoku a little bit there. But David Njoku, rest of season with Joe Flacco, or with Jameis Winston, obviously has incredible upside there. Should continue. I mean, we've got the surge of Cedric Tillman, right? Jerry Jeudy is getting a little bit. Elijah Moore is getting a little bit. Multiple people are going to be able to eat in this offense, but I would expect Njoku to be one of the top two looks within this offense. So that is absolutely someone who is another surging tight end that we want to lean into for sure. For sure. I mean, my God, as abysmal as tight ends started off, we could be kind of on the cusp of having far more dependable, high upside top 5 options. Because when I'm looking at these guys rest of season, it starts to get shaky in terms of ranking them because there's so many guys that justifiably deserve to be ranked in the top 10. So it gets exciting. We finally got tight ends back on the table here. Let's answer some more questions here. Kincaid or Ferguson? I do lean towards let me double check here to make sure. Yeah, I lean towards Ferguson by literally one spot. I have them ranked back to back, and the difference there is just the matchup is better for Ferguson against Atlanta. Atlanta's defense has obviously been a little suspect this season. Trade. Oh man, losing my place here for comments. Trade Flowers and Aaron Jones for Tyreek and Tony Pollard. Flowers and Aaron Jones for Tyreek and Tony Pollard. I like that for you. I would 100% do that. Obviously, that's a massive upgrade at wide receiver. And quite frankly, while I do like Aaron Jones, I like Tony Pollard just as much. Pollard has been incredible considering the destitute position he's been in with his offense and the shaky quarterback situation. So that's an excellent trade. I would absolutely make that one. Geno or Stafford, I would start. Let me check my rankings because honestly, off the top of my head, I don't know which one I have higher. Stafford. I would go with Stafford over Geno. And that one has been tough for me. I'm not going to lie. I have debated back and forth on Geno's position in my rankings just because, and he's fallen a little bit further back. And I don't like that because I like the matchup for him against the LA Rams. But the problem is that there's a couple of matchups here. I don't want to go away from Baker Mayfield. I have to rank him higher. I like the matchup for Dak. And garbage time Dak does pull through. So garbage time Dak and a good matchup where he's going to be chasing points against Atlanta. Yeah, I'm a little bit higher on Dak this week. So Geno is just kind of falling back in terms of victim of guys just having a little bit higher upside this week. Bo Nix is someone who I would start over him. A healthy Jordan Love, obviously. So Matt Stafford is a guy that is falling above him as well. Start Devonta Smith or Njoku or Josh Downs. I would go with Devonta Smith. Again, he is more of a volatile receiver for sure. And maybe you feel a little bit safer with obviously, Njoku, we just talked about it, very safe option as well. Josh Downs, very safe, but I want to reach for that ceiling with Devonta Smith, so I lean that direction. Tucker Kraft or Cade Otton. I would start Cade Otton over Tucker Kraft. One running back and one flex. Dobbins, Brian Robinson, Devonta Smith. Oh, this is a tough one. Or Keon Coleman. For running back, I lean towards Dobbins. Brian Robinson is a weird one because while I'm not threatened by Austin Eckler, he is pushing just enough to kind of make it a weird situation there. And then again, between Devonta Smith and Keon Coleman, I do lean Devonta Smith. Non-PPR does make it a little bit more difficult. I favor Devonta Smith in PPR, and Keon Coleman does appear to have a little bit more touchdown equity at this point, but I would still go with Devonta Smith. Good tight end question here. Tucker Kraft or Mark Andrews? Or should I put Mark Andrews at my flex 2 position over Dobbs, Worthy, JSN, or Chase Brown? I low-key kind of like this matchup for Chase Brown, but you're right. I feel a little bit uncomfortable. No, I would not flex because out of your flex options there, I do think Worthy is still the guy that I would definitely start over all of those options. And then I feel comfortable with Worthy over Andrews. So no, for you, I would just stick it out with Tucker Kraft and then I would flex Worthy. From Ted, is it worth holding on to Jonathan Brooks? It is. And I feel your pain on that one. I roster him in one league. And at this point, we've held for 9 weeks. We got to keep on holding. All we can do is cross our fingers right here that Carolina sees an opportunity and trades Chuba Hubbard to somewhere like Dallas. I don't see them doing it, but like realistically, that would be the most logical situation for everybody here, right? We got to hold on just in case. We got to see it through, right? You would hate to. This is a situation where if you held a rookie this long, you can't bail out now. We got to actually see the man in action unless we get somebody to buy. We can't. We got to hold. We got to hold right now. Nope. Hockenson is not going to be limited on Sunday. They said he plans to play a full complement of snaps, and I believe them. Just because, again, this is a guy who came off of IR technically 3 weeks ago. They held to the proper time, literally the entire time you have to activate him. So the man should be 100% ready to go. This is not a rushed back situation. This is kind of the exact timeline we expected it on him for him to return in early November. So this is hitting expectations, and it makes sense that he is going to be ready immediately. We'll do a couple more questions here, and then I got to call it a day. I went longer than I was supposed to. I got to get these kids prepared for bed. We got a little bit later start here. I also think there's another player profiler show running up here. Now I realize that. I think I'm conflicting with another player profiler show, so I apologize to whoever else is live right now. I realize that I have gone over my time here in my time slot. All right, let's wrap up with a couple more questions here. Is Dionte Johnson and Dobbins for Brees good? 100% do that. Yes, Holden, immediately make that trade. Yes. Tight end question, Otton or Laporta or both in flex 1. Now, this is literally a perfect situation because I'm actually going to talk on a podcast tomorrow for Yahoo, like heads up about the possibility of flexing tight ends this week. This is a good option. This is a good week where guys like Cade Otton and Evan Engram, you probably are rostering other tight ends. So you have the option to flex tight ends. Yeah, I would 100% be down with starting Cade Otton and flexing Sam Laporta with Jameson out. Yeah, you're on the right track there. Couple more questions here. Keon or Amari. I do have Amari ranked higher by literally like maybe 1 or 2 spots. I'm quite frankly undecided on that one. I haven't planted a firm flag in it. Keon has been on fire. I do think last week was a weird outlier game in terms of volume for Amari Cooper, and that's going to pick up this week coming up. So I'm still okay with Amari Cooper is kind of like a borderline wide receiver 2 there. They're in literally the exact same range for me. Singletary or Dobbs. I lean towards Singletary. Again, that's assuming Tyrone Tracy is out with the concussion. Obviously, if Tyrone Tracy is in, we need to veer hard away from Singletary, unfortunately. And then one more question, Dobbs or JSN? I lean towards JSN if DK is out by a smidge, but JSN's production last week and what should have been a good matchup was wildly underwhelming. I'm starting to worry in this, and I kind of felt this way, that JSN is just not that dude that is going to take over as the wide receiver 1 in this offense. Unfortunately, I hate that for him. But just go ahead and play JSN rather than risk the situation of Dobbs with an injured Jordan Love. It's just a better situation for you to go ahead and just play JSN. But that wraps things up. And thank you, Senior Football. Appreciate you with the amazing comment. Hit the like button, people. Thank you so much. Your questions are always wonderful. I know I didn't get to all of them because you all have amazing 10,000 questions, and I wish I could answer every single one. So if I didn't answer your question, feel free to tag me on social media. 9 times out of 10, if you tag me on Twitter, I will answer, just because that's the easy, like, notifications are so easy to see in there. So feel free to just tag me and I'll see it in Twitter, and you can ask your question there and I will answer. It's Tera Time, TERATIME. But that is it. That wraps things up. As a reminder, in addition to the like button, make sure that you are subscribed to the podcast on all platforms if you're not already subscribed, and make sure that you are subscribed to Player Profiler as well. We are the official mailbag show for Player Profiler, and if you are in the mood for one more subscription, you can always subscribe to me on YouTube or follow me as well on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, wherever social media is. That is where you can find me at It's Tera Time. So I appreciate you all for tuning in. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask me, tag me, drop comments and videos, but Twitter, again, is the better place to get those directly seen. Other than that, appreciate you all joining in. To the TikTok crowd, make sure that you're following well so you can get the notifications when I go live. I will talk to you all again next week or maybe sooner. Appreciate you all. Have a wonderful fantasy week. I hope you all win, unless you are playing me.